You're listening to the Things of That Nature podcast. Coming to you from Denver, the Mile High City, is me, your host, Rockshana. I invite you to join me for truly honest, passionate, and fun talks that motivate, invigorate, and maybe inspire. When you're already in the Mile High, the sky's the limit. Everything and anything goes. So let's start talking about things of that nature. Hey everyone, thanks for tuning in to this episode of the Things of That Nature podcast. I'm your host, Rockshana, and today I have the host of Choose Your Struggle podcast, Jay Shiftman. Hey Jay, how's it going?
I'm good, Rockshana. Thanks so much for having me.
Thank you. So how long have you had your podcast?
So I started my podcast in February before the COVID-19 epidemic. I was doing a lot of public speaking. And, I started hearing, obviously in January, what they were saying about the epidemic. And I thought, if there's any way for me to keep getting my message out there, I'm down for that. That's what I'm looking to do. And a buddy of mine who's a comedian in Chicago started his own podcast. And I said, look, man, I love you, but if you can do this, I can do this. So I started my own podcast then.
I only laugh because that's kind of similar to why I started mine, besides the fact that I like talking to people. And that's what kind of lit the fire under my butt once everything happened. And I was like, hey, if these people can do it, I could totally do it. I should stop procrastinating and just do it.
That's right.
What made you choose that title, Choose Your Struggle?
Choose Your Struggle is my brand. It's everything from, it's on my bracelets that I sell and give out to people who are guests on my podcast. It's the title of not only, a couple of my speeches. And it's sort of the mantra that I teach when it comes to my coaching clients.
Okay, neat. And what were you speaking before the podcast?
Yeah, so I've been doing, I'll say this. My speaking experience goes back about 5 years, and I was I'm 10 years in recovery from a prescription pill addiction, and 5 years in, I still saw that as a mark of shame because unfortunately the stigma around issues of mental health and addiction is very, very real. So I was very lucky to have a friend. I used to live in Cincinnati, Ohio, and he runs a cool nonprofit there that encourages well-known or influential Cincinnatians to tell their story on stage. And he asked me to tell my story a couple times, and I kept telling him, man, it's not going to happen. Stop asking. But he was persistent. And one day I went home to see my parents, as we do, for dinner. And I walked into my dad's office, and I said, we started talking, and I told him about this offer. And I remember this clearly. He had the New York Times in his hand, and he lowered it. He looked at me and said, fear is never a good reason not to do something. And then he picked back up the newspaper and kept reading as if he had no idea that he just blew my entire world up. So the next day I said yes to my buddy who was asking me to give this speech, and the ball started rolling right then. It was definitely one of those experiences of being thrown into the deep end, if you know what I mean. I got up on this stage, and I'd given a couple talks before, but as I said in my first one, this is the first time I'll be saying this in a room where the people didn't have to be there. I am in recovery. I'm in, whatever term you want to use. And the ball just started rolling, and I've been doing it since. So, I've been doing this for about 5 years, and I'm lucky that I love it because, no one's getting rich off talking about issues of mental health or substance misuse and recovery, but I love it. And I love the ability to help others.
Yes. That getting on a platform and telling people your story or telling them something that you're like, hey, you should hear this. And the aftermath of it, of the resignation of, oh, wow, that really helps me. Or, oh, that changed my life. I like it. I enjoy it. And you're right. It's the helping others that really, really, really hones in. It makes it worth it. All the nervousness before getting on stage and then knowing you help somebody, it makes it worth it.
That's right.
But the parental mic drop.
That's exactly what it was.
Neat. So, what is your story? If you want to give us all of it, or maybe a snippet.
Sure. Well, here's the short-ish version. I'm 33, and like many, mostly men, but also women of this generation, I was diagnosed with ADHD as a young kid, and we saw this boom in the 90s of people who were being diagnosed with this disorder, and
Mm-hmm.
not only that, were given chemicals or drugs that were very very not that often tested for long periods of time. So we were sort of the test subjects for this, and now we know that what these chemicals do to the young adolescent brain. And look, let's be honest, puberty in the era or the period of your life that is your preteens and your mid-teens, it's a tough time as it is, right? I mean, we can all remember back to those days, and the world just seemed to be very difficult every single day for us back then. So now we obviously know that putting people already going through these extreme mental changes on high rates of chemicals, well, there's going to be some side effects, but at the time that wasn't really discussed. So the late 90s, I'm getting diagnosed with this and being treated for it. And not long after, my therapist who prescribed me with this said that I was also showing signs of a mood disorder. And again, of course I was showing some erratic behavior signs, but at the time we didn't question it. Fast forward to my late teens, I've been diagnosed with bipolar. I'm being treated for bipolar on top of the ADHD, and my life just starts to spiral. And I become physically and mentally dependent and addicted on every single one of the prescriptions I'm taking. I'm abusing all of them. And at 23, I finally gave up, and believing the diagnosis and sort of buying into this idea that things weren't going to get better. I attempted suicide twice. Luckily, I lived, and I ended up overdosing the second time, and spent the next 3 weeks in a lockdown unit, and then 3 months after that in a long-term care facility, where I got to know people who actually had very real issues of mental health, and others who were struggling with substance misuse and the like. And it was there that I got to sort of open my eyes and realize that what I was going through more resembled the latter and not the diagnosis that I'd been given. So I left there, and this is January 2nd, 2010, and took me 3 months to get off of every prescription pill that I was on, because I was on so many that if I had just stopped using right then and there, it would have literally killed me. So I got off of everything and spent the next 5 years really just learning who I was as a person for the first time in my life, and healing mentally and maturing physically and mentally. And spent the last 5 years telling my story, helping others who are struggling, and teaching people, those of us in recovery have had to learn good mental health habits in the worst way possible. And I never want anyone to have to go through what I went through. So if I can teach you some of these things that I've learned in that period and save you that experience, well, then we're all the better because of it.
Okay. Wow. That is a story. That is a struggle. Now, since you are in a different state of mind, do you feel that when you were being prescribed and diagnosed with all these symptoms, do you think you really had them, or were they just adolescent teen boy growing up?
Well, Rockshana, I want to say first off that I do these interviews a lot, and people really want to hear about mental health and substance misuse. It's a topic that is on all of our minds right now, especially the mental health aspect. But very few hosts have actually asked me that question. So thank you for doing that. I will say this. I want to make this incredibly clear. In the last couple of decades, the advancement in not only diagnosing but treating issues of mental health and substance misuse is incredible. The how far we've come, I think we'll look back in another, let's say 20 to 50 years and say, we've learned even more since. But those couple of decades after the year 2000 were very influential. That being said, the people in this industry are just that. They're people and they make mistakes. I believe wholeheartedly that I was misdiagnosed. I still, like many people before COVID, at least, was struggling with anxiety. And like many people since COVID have been, it's been flourishing. Mm-hmm. I still struggle with depression at times. I've had OCD my whole life, but those are all manageable issues for me. What I was experiencing because of this extreme influx in chemicals was not manageable. And so I hate to give you this long answer from what was a very simple question, but the answer is yes and no. I would never say that I'm in perfect mental health because I honestly don't think that exists. That being said, I was given the diagnosis of a very extreme and life-changing issue of mental health that I did not have.
I like the long answer. It works.
Thank you.
Do you ever find yourself doing the woulda, shoulda, coulda, wouldas?
Oh, man, you're coming with all the hard questions today. That's a really great question. I like to say that being in recovery is the first line of my bio and the last line of my obituary. I truly believe that this period of my life made me who I am. I mean, obviously it's what I do for a living, but it's more than that because I have the absolute blessing of being able to not really separate my quote unquote day job from my life because this is what I do. I am an advocate for mental health and issues of substance misuse and recovery. Now, I couldn't do that if I, or at least to the extent that I can, if I hadn't gone through that, what I went through. And I honestly don't know if all the amazing things that came after would have happened if I hadn't gone through this. Now, again, to give you a long answer for a short question, are there pieces of my story that I wish I could change? Oh my God, yes. The going through withdrawals and getting off all the prescriptions was one of the most painful things I've ever gone through in my life. I have a tattoo that spans my feet. And for any of the listeners who are tattoo people, if you have one, that is one of the most physically painful things you'll ever do is get a tattoo on your feet. I went through that like every day for 3 months. That was withdrawal for me.
Wow.
It is painful in a physical sense, a spiritual sense, a mental sense. It's just horrible. So if I could not go through that, yeah, I'm down. Like let's do that. And some of the ways that I treated people when I was struggling, addiction has a way of alienating you from those around you. And you don't see that when you're struggling. There is a sense of, oh, well, they're just not loyal, or they don't really love me, or whatever the case is. And so if I could not do that again, yeah, sure. Let's go back and fix that. But the whole period, I honestly would not trade for the world.
That's humbling in the sense of it's kind of like this was my life. This is my life. And these are the things that I went through to get where I am right now.
That's right. And I appreciate that you hear that. I think that we all have things in our lives that are that to some degree, that there are parts of our lives where we go, man, if I could go back and fix, even just a little of that, I would do so in a second. But the overall, or the message that we got by going through that, we wouldn't trade. Now, mine happened to be pretty extreme and it was really rough, but that doesn't mean that it's any different from someone who had a similar experience, name whatever you want, that made them who they are.
Right. Wow. Cool. Are you a single child?
I am not. I'm the oldest of four boys.